Hi, I'm comedian Dean Obeidallah, and thanks for having me on The Point. Here is my point. Why in this presidential campaign, with Republicans fighting each other, and the unbelievable media coverage, why is there one issue not talked about? And that is God. And I don't mean God in general. I mean the fact that 4 of the presidential candidates running, now there's only 3 left of the 4, all said that God told them to run for office. Rick Santorum, Rick Perry, Michelle Bachmann, and Herman Cain all said God told them to run for president. Yeah, yes, the same God who created the earth and said, let there be light, and there was light, told these 4 people out of over 300 million Americans to run for president. Why does the media not ask a question? Like, are you crazy? Let's be quite honest. If I said, tonight I'm staying home because God told me to stay in and watch Glee, people slowly back away from me. But if you're running for president and you're going to have your finger on the button that could result in the apocalyptic destruction of our planet, it's okay to say God talks to you. And here's the weird thing to me. Only Republicans say God talks to them. Pat Buchanan said it, George Bush said it, and these 4. Apparently GOD loves the GOP. But there are questions I have. First of all, why does God not talk to Democrats? God knows they need their help. Second, and the bigger question, if God is going to speak to these 4 candidates running for office, why does he not give them the right answer to the questions? They make mistake after mistake. Look at Rick Perry. November 9th debate, couldn't remember the 3rd government agency he wanted to eliminate. There was a guy dying for divine intervention. Michelle Bachmann, not knowing where the revolution started, thinking the founding fathers tried to end slavery, and of course Herman Cain, you think God will remind him that he was having a 13-year affair with a woman. You know, perhaps. So my question for you is, shouldn't the media be asking people questions? If you're going to say God spoke to you, when did he speak to you? What did he tell you? Should we be concerned that you have voices in your head? Thanks. I'm Dean Obeidallah, and you can follow me at deanofcomedy.com.
Well, Michael, obviously I agree with Dean. And it seems that whenever God talks to anybody, he either tells them to shoot someone or run for president.
Right. Exactly.
He never says, like, do your laundry.
No, and if you were Michelle Bachmann, wouldn't you be pissed that God also told Rick Santorum and Rick Perry to run? Like, wait a second, God.
Wait a minute, I thought we had something going, right?
What were you thinking?
I thought we were right there.
What's going on?
Richard, what's your theory here? Is God not, is he just spreading out his bets just in case with these 4? Or isn't he supposed to know how this movie ends? Why is he messing with the other 3?
Well, a lot of people don't know this about God, but he's got a great sense of humor. And he just thought, why don't I mess with these people? Why don't I tell them all to run and see what happens? That's why the theme song for the Republican debates is What If God Were One of Us? Did you know that? No. Look, who knows? I grew up in 2 different religious traditions, or I was exposed to 2, and one of them, they said very clearly, if you talk to God, you're devout. If God talks to you, you're psychotic. That was one, and these people have broken that rule. But then there was the other, the sort of fundamentalist Christian world where, I had a relative, she and her fiance couldn't decide if they really wanted to get married, and they said, well, we sat down and we had a talk with Jesus about it last night. Now, they're not schizophrenic. They know that they didn't literally talk to Jesus, so there's that metaphorical thing. But yeah, if God told all these people to run, he's a hell of a kidder.
And with Michelle Bachmann, there was, first God told her to listen to her husband, and
to be submissive, right?
To be submissive to her husband, who apparently is interested in other people being submissive to him. But anyway,
God telling someone to watch Glee.
Yeah, I know, right? Anyway, hey everybody. And then he told her to be a tax lawyer, and then apparently God changed his mind. And here's what Bachmann said: if I felt that's what the Lord was calling me to do, I would do it. But I will not seek a higher office if God is not calling me to do it. But apparently at some point he picked up his cell phone and was like, Michelle, it's go time.
Yeah.
Right? But then he called Herman Cain and said, quote, this is from Herman Cain, not God. I prayed and prayed and prayed. And when I finally realized that it was God saying that this is what I needed to do, I was like, Moses? You got the wrong man, Lord, are you sure? So he's like, I'm like Moses, and I think you got the wrong man. And it turns out he did have the wrong man.
Yeah, exactly, he had the wrong guy.
Right.
I think it just doesn't speak well of the country when, as a political candidate, if you mention that you have a close relationship with God, that God talks to you, you're immediately taken seriously. Like, it is something that you need to say, right? And the religion part of politics is the part that really gets on my nerves, because I don't care what kind of relationship you have with God. I want to know whether or not your relationship with God is going to affect me. Does that mean that you're going to be up in my uterus telling me what I can and can't do with my reproductive health? Does that mean that you are going to, change comprehensive sex education in schools? If that's the case, then I want to hear about your religion. Otherwise, I don't care if God is talking to you, and I don't care if you pray. I don't care about it at all. And it's interesting because if you are a Mormon or if you have a different religion, immediately you are cast off, right? So Mitt Romney gets a lot of grief because of the fact that he's a Mormon. So did John Huntsman.
Right.
So,
and look, that brings up a second issue, which is, imagine if they said, instead of, hey, I talked to God and he told me to do it, they were like, yeah, so I talked to Allah the other day and he told me, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, run for office. Do you think that would work?
This playing field is that you're in a country that is at least 75% Christian. So if you're running for, Congress in Massachusetts, you're not going to say you're a Yankees fan. You're not going to do the same. You're not going to say you're all about Allah if you're here. And I did a little digging into the idea of talking to God. And the way it is equivocated is that people say that this is their calling, in the same way a chef would say, this is my calling, this is what I'm here to do. Michelle Bachmann and her ilk are saying, this is my calling. My calling is to run for president. So we could say it's God talking to them, but they're looking at it in a very religious way, that this is what I've been sent to do, which does, I'm not, I still think it's wacky, and I understand.
It's code talk. I mean, it's their coded message to their base saying, I'm one of you, I speak your language. But you think about it over history, the people who are really religious and involved, Gandhi never said, I talked to God last night. Martin Luther King never said, I talked to God last night.
He'd been to the mountaintop.
He'd been to the mountaintop, but he didn't say, God, maybe he did.
No. What he would say is, look at the example of Jesus.
Exactly.
And here's a guy who is my hero of all time, Martin Luther King Jr. Very religious guy, very, has tremendous amount of faith. That isn't the problem. The problem is, as you were pointing out, Richard, for somebody to come and say, no, I talked to the Picard, and the Picard says to do this, an old Star Trek reference. But seriously, how do you?
Look, I get it. He wasn't running for president. He was a reverend. He could say those things as a reverend.
And he didn't even say that.
And he didn't even say. I mean, he said a little more than we're saying that he said. But certainly, he wasn't running for president. Somebody running for president it's separation of church and state. Martin Luther King didn't have to worry about separating anything from anything. He was a reverend.
And the other point is that, look, I get the faith part that you're talking about, Michael. Like, people it's a way that they say it. They're like, I talked God, or
Totally.
and it's the way of saying that they thought about it and they wanted to make sure that they did the right thing. But when they get so specific on what God wanted them to do, then I get to thinking, like, how do you know? Are you sure he didn't mean that you should be a plumber?
Well, yeah. I mean, by the way, that marriage between my relative, my relative and her husband, that didn't work out either. God gave bad advice in that case too. I think it's a way also of not taking responsibility for yourself. You and I, we first met because we disagreed a little bit about atheism. But I think when people say this, they're not taking responsibility for their own decision. They're saying, well, don't blame me for running. God told me to do it. Well, you know what? You're trying to be leader of the free world. Why don't you take responsibility for your decisions?
I like that answer.
Richard and I had dueling blogs because I came out really strong against religion, and you fought back on that. So it's funny that we're talking about it again many, many years later. But last point I have on this is something that Anna mentioned and Richard had alluded to. Look, it's one thing when they get into your business, as you said, get into your uterus, which was interesting and somewhat uncomfortable. Okay, but to me, the thing that I care most about is this whole idea of the apocalypse, right? So you've got these Christian fundamentalists who think, well, the way Jesus is going to come back is if we start Armageddon. Now, if you're talking to God, and remember Bush said, according to Jacques Chirac, he said, Gog and Magog are coming out of Iraq and we need to go fight them. And Chirac said, who the F is that, right? I don't know what this guy's talking about. But if you're starting wars or you want Armageddon to come about because of your fundamentalist beliefs, then we got a real problem.